Thank you for inviting me once again to share with you the results of a study that I did in Jamaica a number of years ago. It's a longitudinal study. And to briefly present those results, and some of you have seen many of these results before. This was a study that we did back in the 80s, and it was to take 30 cannabis-using pregnant women and match them for age and parity and socioeconomic status with 30 women who did not use cannabis, and then compare the course of their pregnancies and compare their neonatal outcomes. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the neonatal part. We measured these babies using the Brazelton behavioral scale, neurobehavioral scale, at 1 day, 3 days, and 30 days. At 3 days, we found no differences between the two cohorts, and at 30 days, we found that the exposed group of babies did better on every variable than the non-exposed, which was pretty counterintuitive, and did significantly better on 2 of the scales, which had to do with autonomic stability and reflexes, which in fact were just the opposite of Peter Freed's work with his cohort of exposed babies. Then, fortunately, we were able to secure funding from the National Institute of Drug Abuse, and we went back to Jamaica to look at these babies, whom we had followed pretty intensively through funding from the March of Dimes. But we went back and followed these babies to age 4 and 5, and we wanted to test these children at age 4 before they started school, and then at age 5 after they had been in school. And we divided the group in order to get some dose-related effects. We divided the sample into 4 groups. So we had the large group of non-users, 30 non-users, and 30 users divided into light users, 1 to 10 per week. That's per week, not per day. And 11 to 20 per week were moderate users, and 21 to 70 spliffs. I don't know if you've seen a Jamaican spliff, but it's substantial. And to 70 a week. And we did have one woman in the study who smoked approximately 70 a week, about 10 a day. We also considered the regularity and frequency of ganja tea consumption because in Jamaica, ganja tea is a routine preparation of marijuana. It's specifically given to children and pregnant women as well as adults, and enjoys actually a much more widespread use crossing class boundaries. So it's an important medicine in Jamaica. We measured the children at age 4 using 3 measures: the McCarthy scale, the McCarthy scale of children's abilities, the behavioral style questionnaire, and a household rating scale. And the McCarthy is made up of 5 scales and then a general cognitive index, and it includes verbal ability, perceptual performance, quantitative skills, memory, and motor. And then the first 3, verbal, perceptual performance, and quantitative skills, are combined into a general cognitive index, which is a lot like an IQ score. This instrument is used cross-culturally. We made a few minor modifications for the Jamaican sample, but essentially the established validity and reliability of that instrument was just fine for the Jamaican population. We also looked at the behavioral style questionnaire, and this assesses the temperament of each child as perceived by the child's primary caregiver. There are 72 items on this test. It measures 9 components. that would be typically describe the temperament of a child, activity level, rhythmicity, that is how they sort of organize their day, approach, withdrawal, adaptability, intensity of reaction, quality of mood, threshold of response, how responsive, how reactive is a child, their distractibility, and then their attention span and persistence. Both the McCarthy scales and the temperament scales were administered away from the home environment to an investigator who was blinded to the child's exposure. And then we, in order to capture something in the environment that we could quantify, now you have to understand that we had researchers living in these communities in Jamaica for 5 years. I mean, they knew these children really well. They followed them on a weekly basis. It really is perhaps the best data set with regard to exposure for both mothers and children that currently exists. But in order to quantify something, we created a household quality of housing index, mainly because housing in Jamaica is perhaps the clearest indicator of socioeconomic status. So this was a housing index that we made up that was actually derived from our observations of the low-income population with whom we were working. Now, before I go on to the age 5 measures, fundamentally our findings were, and we did a multiple analysis of covariance. I won't go into all the details, but basically when we controlled for the household rating, there were absolutely no significant differences among the 4 groups on any of the McCarthy scales or the behavioral style questionnaire. Just no differences at all. So then we went on to look at these children at age 5. And we used the same McCarthy scale of children's abilities. We used the behavioral style questionnaire. And we introduced a more sophisticated measure. Let me go to that. The home scale. And the home scale was an important addition because it really gave us a much more granularity to our analysis, and we were able to relate items in the home scale, the home environment for child development, to some of our findings. And that includes stimulation through equipment, toys, and experiences. Jamaican children, low-income Jamaican children do not have a lot of toys, although they do make some toys themselves, but there is equipment and books often and experiences in the household which permit that stimulation. Stimulation of mature behavior. It is not unusual, for example, for a 2-year-old, 2.5-year-old in Jamaica to already be washing out her father's handkerchiefs or something like that to learn some adult skills. Stimulating physical and language environment, avoidance of restriction and punishment, pride, affection, thoughtfulness, masculine stimulation, and independence from parental control are all part of this home scale. Again, this has been used internationally. We did modify it for the Jamaican environment, but the modifications were simple and obvious. For example, when there was opportunity for a child to identify an apple, since apples aren't growing in Jamaica, we changed it to, I guess we changed it to mangoes. So it was that kind of modification. We excluded from our analysis, I want to share this with you, 5 children. One who's, actually we had so much missing data on this child, we decided not to include her in the study. But there were 4 children who could not complete the McCarthy scale. And one was from the moderate exposure group, one was from the heavy exposure group, and 2 were from the non-exposure group. So they're pretty much evenly divided between the 2 groups. One from the non-exposure group, we referred these children to a Jamaican facility for further evaluation. And one of the children in the non-exposure group was diagnosed as mildly retarded. The other three were reported to be low performers due to social or environmental disadvantage. They were described by the test administrators being very shy and withdrawn. And so we did eliminate those results from the study. We also, we also measured school attendance in this. Just simple, do they show up at school? It turned out to be not as simple, however, because Hurricane Gilbert interfered during the middle of this study and essentially washed away many of the school attendance records. So we had to rely on a lot on teacher accounting for these. But as you can see, we had regular school attenders, that's 4 days a week in Jamaica is 32, irregular 17, and then non-attenders were 10. Let's see. Okay, now as with the age 4 studies, the results of the MANOVA analysis revealed, again, absolutely no differences among the 4 ganja use groups on any of the development or the temperament scales. Again, absolutely no differences. On the other hand, analysis of the home scale revealed that the subscale, called stimulation with toys, games, reading material, was significantly related to several McCarthy scales: verbal, perceptual, memory, the general cognitive index, and the temperament, as well as the temperament characteristics of the threshold. The analysis from the subscale stimulation of mature behavior also showed highly significant relationships to every McCarthy scale and to the temperament category of mood. So, and the regularity of basic school attendance, basic schools like kindergarten in the United States, also indicated that there was a relationship between basic school attendance and the McCarthy verbal, perceptual, memory, motor, and general cognitive index. So what does all this mean? It essentially tells us that we can't really conclude that there's necessarily no impact from ganja use prenatally whatsoever, but what can be concluded is that the child who attends basic school regularly is provided with a variety of stimulating experiences at home, who is encouraged to show mature behavior, has a profoundly better chance of performing at a higher level on the skills measured by the McCarthy, whether or not his or her mother consumed ganja during pregnancy. Hello, hello. It means if you go to school, you're going to do better on these criteria. So it doesn't sound like a very interesting finding, but given what everybody else was finding at the time, we thought it was pretty darned interesting. And again, a little bit counterintuitive. I don't mean to sound self-serving, but I really love this study. And I really stand behind it because polydrug use was not an issue in Jamaica. The women who were smoking marijuana during pregnancy were smoking at the most 1 tobacco cigarette a week, usually on Saturday nights as a treat. And in Jamaica, in rural Jamaica, you buy 1 cigarette at a time. So there maybe had 1 cigarette, but most of them didn't smoke cigarettes at all. No alcohol use, with the exception of an occasional beer on a weekend. We have dose-related data. We have nested case control, so we can actually look at the difference for each child. We can show the progress of each child through this 5-year period, which Freed's work cannot do, by the way. We have environmental data, excellent environmental data, not only the home scale, but also our ethnographic observations. and great reliability in the maternal use data. So it's not just self-report, but again, community corroboration and direct observations. So what is the impact of this work? This work, this 4-year-old study, was published in 1991, 15 years ago. 15 years ago. What is the impact of this study? Absolutely none. And this year I took a look, in fact, Ethan Russo very nicely sent me an article, a review article by Huizink and Mulder that sort of took all the literature on cannabis use during pregnancy and neurobehavioral and cognitive functioning in human offspring and said, you know, they don't even mention the Jamaican study. Well, no kidding. I read the articles published in 2006, and they reported only 2 longitudinal cohorts. Peter Fried's study and the Ottawa prenatal prospective study, and the Richardson and Day cohort, the maternal health practices and child development study. No mention of the Jamaican study at all. Again, they reported the increased tremors and startles, Fried's work, the altered sleep patterns, Richardson and Day's, signs of stress, Lester, at 6 years old, impulsive and hyperactive behavior, more delinquent behavior, more impulsive behavior at the continuous performance task. Again, my work, I'm trying not to take this personally, the Jamaican work was not cited at all as different from these findings. 3 years ago when Ethan Russo and Mary Lynn and I were working on his wonderful book on women and marijuana, he asked Peter Fried to submit a review of the work. And Peter Fried's review also left out anything to do with the Jamaican study. I think Ethan Russo had to call, am I right, Ethan? You had to call and ask Peter to mention the Jamaican study. And he did put in a passing reference to it, but didn't mention the fact that it was, in fact, a longitudinal study, just like his study. And in fact, he was a consultant to the 5-year study in my project, which is really amazing. Unlike Donald Abramson, I have not had such great luck with NIDA. When I went back with these findings to get refunded to look at these kids at age 9 and 10, NIDA said, we are really not interested in funding this study anymore. They did say that if I made Peter Fried a co-principal investigator, they would consider funding it. So I just decided I'm going to try and find other ways to get this funded. So the research has languished, which is a shame. And until last summer, when we went back to Jamaica and we found 40 of the original children in this study, I think we can find more if we go back again, and who are now adults and living very adult lives and have children of their own, and you know, are doing quite well. Peter Fried, in his own work, has said very little impact up to 3 years old. Beyond that age, no impact on IQ. No relationship of marijuana use to miscarriage, to presentation of birth, to ADGAR status, to neonatal complications, physical abnormalities, no meconium staining, no impact on cognitive outcomes until, he says, age 4. The tremors and startles data findings did not hold up. Neither did the head circumference. Neither did the motor development. Neither did the language expression. And yet none of that information, those data, are really in the literature for people to see. And of course this results in a lot of misunderstanding in the public. So again, trying not to take this personally, what is the reluctance to include this study as well as some other studies in the common reviews of this work? I think, number one, I say this as an anthropologist, I think there's a terrible arrogance and ethnocentrism that refuses to accept the experience or the science of other cultures. Ethan Russo's compelling review of both the ancient and contemporary use of cannabis by women in other cultures, for example, is irrefutable. It was there, it happened, and yet there's a failure to acknowledge that in such reviews. Contemporary evidence from the UK, from Denmark, from Jamaica, from Israel, from the Netherlands, from Spain, even from Canada tends to be disregarded, unless, of course, it's funded by NIDA with Peter Fried as the principal investigator. So, what is this all about? I think it's about an ethnocentrism in the science. I think it's about the bias against the null hypothesis, that it's the politics of the science, not just the science itself. And I recommend that for any of you who haven't read it, read the Lancet article published in 1989 called The Bias Against the Null Hypothesis, in which they review all the abstracts submitted to the Society of Pediatric Research between 1980 and 1989 about maternal use of cocaine. And you can apply the same principle to articles and about marijuana. Their analysis revealed that negative abstracts, that is, when you found nothing wrong with cocaine, were similar to or better than positive aspects. And that among the rejected, I mean, the rate of acceptance and rejection of the positive, that is, the articles that found something bad about cocaine, 57% were accepted. Of the negative, only 11% was accepted. Even though a review of the methodology revealed that among the rejected papers, as the negative ones, they were methodologically superior in every way. Unfortunately, this is just the politics of trying to get published. I think it's a miracle that Pediatrics, for example, published our work on the neonatal outcomes. But it took us 3 years. We were able to publish the 5-year results before we published the neonatal outcomes because we were dealing with American journals instead of the West Indian Medical Journal. So unfortunately, we don't have the opportunity to analyze the cannabis literature in this way. But if we could look at all the fugitive literature that's out there that didn't get published, we might find a very different picture of prenatal cannabis exposure. Also, preventing us from doing this are the politics of building a research career. Most research is done by academics, and academia is a very conservative environment where tenure often is more important than truth. And so it's difficult to be a researcher on a topic that is so incendiary and has so many political issues. I mean, I can't tell you the number of times I say, well, I do research on marijuana in Jamaica. And everyone's like, oh, I wish I did that kind of research. I mean, my kids love it. They say, wow, my mom's so cool. She studies drugs and sex in Jamaica. But most people, I mean, it's very hard to be taken seriously with this kind of research. And it didn't matter to me. I mean, I have to tell you the number of letters that I have gotten from my bosses, the presidents of the universities where I've worked, accompanying letters that were sent to the president, irate people, Lieutenant Colonel Rhett, ex-Marine, saying that Dr. Dreyer should be fired on the spot for supporting this kind of research. And I just went into, this is an example, I sort of Googled to see what was out there for the general public regarding the pregnancy and marijuana. So I come with one of the first things on the first page of the Google list is the Northwest Center for Health and Safety. I think this is coming out of Washington or Oregon or someplace, and Portland, Oregon. Okay, big title, exposure to marijuana in womb may harm brain. Where did this comes. First I heard about it. Okay. This is the paragraph. Over the past decades, several studies have linked behavior problems and lower IQ scores in children to prenatal use of marijuana. Here is a recent Italian study done on rats, which corroborates these earlier findings. Included below are excerpts from the Marijuana Research Review recapping these previous studies, which are totally biased. Then it says, it should be noted that a cannabis therapeutics course, that's you guys, okay, us, a cannabis therapeutics course which has been offered in various locales around the country for continuing medical education credits, includes a presentation by Melanie Dreyer, head of the University of Iowa Nursing School, who has written extensively on the benefits of smoking marijuana while pregnant. I mean, it's just, you think it's easy to have a career in this field? I mean, this is the kind of stuff that they publish about you all the time. So the result is, and I'm sorry I've gone over my time, but I think we have a lot of red herrings. I think that, you know, a red herring is something that distracts us from more important questions. For example, in the emphasis to compare users and non-users, exposed, non-exposed, why are we not looking at within the exposed group and to account for the differences within that group? The intra-group variation, I think, is absolutely important. It's great to see that NIDA is softening, the NIH is softening on supporting research, but most of the research that it has softening on is randomized clinical trials that have to do with symptom management in specific diseases. It is not really about sort of quality of life issues. I think marijuana use marijuana use by pregnant women is a big red herring that distracts us from really looking at the impoverished conditions in which women throughout the world have to bear and raise children, in which they are looking for the cheapest, most available substance around in order to alleviate their morning sickness, in order to give them a better sleep at night, and in order to get the energy to do work every day that they have to do in order to support those children. So, yes, while we have the softening of NIDA on the clinical studies and the randomized clinical trials, I think what's wrong with looking at, for example, instead of Peter Fried's executive function, problem solving in 9 to 12-year-olds, why isn't he or someone looking at school performance, peer relations, leadership skills in children, prenatal and family relations, healthy lifestyles? Are they participating in sports? Are they using tobacco and alcohol and other substances? I mean, to me, this is the ultimate outcome, is how we live our lives, not whether you can find some narrow, again, red herring, some narrow little feature called executive function. So I think we need research on quality of life and how marijuana enhances the quality of life. It's not an evolutionary accident that the two activities needed to sustain life and perpetuate the species are eating and sex, and that marijuana makes both of these things pleasurable. That is really, really important. And we need to do more research on it. I won't go through the rest of these, except to say, well, there it is. And ovarian and cannabinoid and cannabis compound. Ovarian, we used to not have to fight like this to get cannabis to women who needed it. And I love this prescription for cannabis to a woman, to Mrs. Puttick. It says, apply significantly to the part each night. I don't know what part they had in mind. And cough syrup for children, in which cannabis is the first ingredient. You know, what are we doing? So again, I thank all of you very much for listening, for being attentive. And I have to say, you know, I do let this research languish a bit because I'm real busy doing a lot of things. But it's good to have these conferences. I thank Mary Lynn and Alice again so much, because it makes me mad all over again and gets me inspired to go back and continue this research. Thank you.